So good morning, everybody. We've got loads of stuff to go through this morning. So I know people are going to be running a little bit late, but we're going to crack on now. There is a recording which we will distribute at the end of this session as well. So for those of you that haven't arrived yet, you will get to hear all of this again. So first off, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on this session, which we've specifically designed for all of us who work in security capacity in and around the higher and further education space. So for those of you who've been working with ANSecurity for some time, you'll clearly remember that we tend to do these sessions in person across the country, but that's not an option this year. So we've had to revert to the dreaded webinar, and we apologise for that, but it's our only choice really. So in order to keep things interesting, I gave the guys a really simple brief. I basically said, just show some really cool, relevant stuff. So hopefully that's what we're going to do today, and please let us know if we've achieved that brief. So who have we got who's going to show you all the cool stuff? Well, certainly not myself. I'm Richard Page. I look after the sales and marketing team here over at ANSecurity. But one of the guys who is James Preston. James, many of you will already know through many of the projects that he's been working on since he joined ANSecurity, actually from Queen's College over at Oxford. So James has got a really unique view from being able to present things from both a customer point of view, but also from a partner point of view as well. James and I are delighted that we've got Eddie Felmer from Ruckus, or Comscope Ruckus as they like to be called these days. Eddie's going to show us some really great insight that you can get from your investments in Ruckus through using the Ruckus Analytics Suite. And finally, last but not least, we've got the ANSecurity co-founder, Dave Peters. So Dave still gets his hands dirty on a day-to-day basis, and he's going to show some really cool stuff, some remote access options that we've got that go beyond the VPN. So we gave the brief of cool stuff, and that's what we're going to show you. But, there's really very little point in having cool stuff for the sake of having it. It absolutely has to serve a business need. And that's briefly where I want to start today's session, because this business of educating students has changed more in the last 12, 13, 14 months than in any single period in history. And basic evolutionary theory tells us that we've got to go and make sure that we evolve. We've got to go and make sure that we change to those changing conditions in order to make sure that we thrive, but initially just to make sure that we financially survive. And there's hundreds of ways in which we can paint the picture of what's gone on with the world and so on, and I really don't want to insult your intelligence. We've all lived through this. We know the world is an entirely different place. But when it comes to security, there are a couple of observations which kind of really set the scene and start making us think about why we need to act slightly differently. So the first observation we've got is pretty abundantly clear here. And, I really tried very hard to not start things off all doom and gloom. But, irrespective of how hard I try, I cannot find a single piece of editorial which gives a contradictory view that there isn't a significant increase in the volume of cyber attacks. They have been increasing exponentially throughout the pandemic, month on month. But you can't actually find out what that increase is, because the honest truth is there's no real trusted scientific way of being able to measure this kind of stuff. So we do what most people do. We go and look at the news, and clearly you've absolutely got to be living in a cave not to notice the different articles and news stories that have come out from across the different sectors, organisations of different sizes, different types. Many have been victims of cyber threats, and there's lots of statistics and numbers that people throw at you, but we tend to go and look at things that we can really measure. And so what we've done is we've looked at one specific college over the past week, and we've looked at the volume of high and critical threats that have been blocked through their Palo Alto firewall, and it's 16 high and 71 critical over a simple 7-day period. And that is actually a 300% increase on an average week that we had pre-pandemic. So that kind of gives you a measure of how things have changed over the last 12 to 14 months. But it's not the volume, it's the changing nature of threats that I think is really concerning. And what you can see on screen here is some pretty simple basic analysis from the world pre-pandemic. And this information comes largely from a series of reports from the DCMS, the Department for Education, and a few other bits and pieces. And what the chart shows you is the volume of institutes that have been impacted in the prior 12 months by breaches of varying different types. Now, I do think I need to probably stress that the source data that we've used for this originally covered all educational institutes. So what we've tried to do is take from that source data anything that relates to academies, multi-academy trusts, local authority maintained schools, in order to try and present a realistic picture for higher and further education. And actually, interestingly, if you were to split higher and further education apart, the numbers are pretty much identical across the two spaces here. So, pre-pandemic, I don't think there are many great surprises here. So, email and online scams, no surprise there. They're probably the most popular attack types. But if you go and look at, where the threats are coming from in terms of people, staff are number one, then it's followed by students, and then it comes down to outsiders in terms of unauthorised use of technology. But, if we go and, all things being equal, extrapolate that same analysis out into the world in 2021, it's an entirely different picture. With the exception of a couple, so, viruses and unauthorised use of technology by students, other than those two, all of the numbers have increased. But it's not the fact that they've increased it's a concern. For me, it's the scale of that increase. Now, clearly, there's a continued growth in online and email-initiated scams. There's no great surprises there. We'd kind of expect that. But there's a massively worrying increase in the volume of ransomware and other financially motivated crimes. If you look at number 5 there, hacking of online bank accounts, that's creeped up by a massive 13% in a really short space of time. But, if we were to look at this with a statistical hat on, the spike that really just jumps off the page is that number 3, unauthorised tech used by outsiders. That's increased by a massive 39% in a really short space of time. But it's the nature of these outsider threats that I think is really most concerning. So, if you just look again at the guidance and news that we've received over the last couple of weeks originally from MI5, but it also came out from the NCSC around the use of professional social networking sites. Now, we all know what people are talking about here, but the fact that we are required to have guidance as to what we should and shouldn't use on that is really interesting. And the thinking behind that is it's purely a measure to help thwart the increase in activity for nation-state-sponsored threat actors. These are the really, really nasty kind. The ones that is very difficult to measure and probably harder to control. But for certain sectors, that's a real importance. And that's where it leads us on to higher and further education, because this is the third observation we've got. It's this increase in the perceived importance of universities and colleges as high-value targets for the threat actors. 10 years ago, we were barely on the radar for any of this kind of stuff, but that's not the case anymore. If you just do a really simple search on the BBC website, you can pull back so many articles, horror stories really, about institutions from across the sector who've been breached. We've got Newcastle, we've got Northumbria, we've got Northampton, Leeds. The list does go on, and these are all stories from the past 12 months, all very, very newsworthy, all reputationally and financially damaging, and all of them absolutely preventable. But then you've got to start thinking about, why within higher and further education are we seen now as being a higher value target? And in order to do that, you've really just got to think like a threat actor. So think about the information that we as educators store that could be exploited if it gets into the wrong hands. Universities and colleges have got so much confidential research, the value of which you really find it difficult to put a price on, but somebody will pay for it. It makes it a real dream for a threat actor. But even if you're one of the institutes that's not actually got anything of value when it comes to confidential intellectual property, That doesn't stop the threat actor from actually rooting around and looking for it. And when they do that rooting around, there's a lot of things of interest that they're actually going to go and find that are particularly valuable for the criminally minded. So, think about data, personal data for staff and students, financial information, credit card information. We've seen instances very recently about cash collection systems being hacked. You've got the increase in IoT. You chuck that all together and it's a real smorgasbord which becomes a threat actor's dream. And if you look at the UK economy at the moment, with the exception of leisure and financial services, higher and further education are currently positioned as the number 3 sector when it comes to the perceived future cybersecurity threat. And 12 months ago, we weren't even on the league table of the top 15 industries. And all that has happened as a result of the pressure and the changes in our environment as a result of the pandemic. So, the world is a nastier place. We understand the reasons. Like I say, we're living through it. But, in terms of our roles as people who provide security and infrastructure solutions around education, there's a bunch of considerations that some are related to the pandemic, some aren't, but different ways in which we need to think in order to go and deliver what our customers need. And the number one is that end-to-end student life experience has changed, partly as a result of pandemic, but partly as a result of the way that young people are acting and operating. They've also changed. The way in which we educate students has absolutely changed over the last 12 months. And the downside is we have had significant impact on our finances as a result of a reduced revenue over the last 12 months, and that is something that has also got a consideration. And all three of these factors are absolutely intrinsically linked. If we don't deal with the first one and two, it definitely makes number 3 significantly worse. So I just want to dip into these in a very, very light amount of detail here. But we look at the student experience. That has changed forevermore, and a lot of that comes down to expectation levels. Students have got a significantly louder voice than they ever had at any point in time. They've got the power, they pay for things, they decide where they want to attend their educational studies, they decide whether they will stay, whether they'll leave, and if they don't like something, they can and they will speak out for it on various different social media platforms. They'll voice their concerns, they'll share their feedback, and that will influence whether people will decide to go and attend your institute or not. If I look over the last few years, I have probably not in a single instance booked a hotel without first checking it out on TripAdvisor, and that's for a one-night stay. If you're the class of 2025, you are spending a lot of time reviewing universities and colleges on student crowd, on what uni, on various different sites that are out there in order to go and make an opinion as to where you're going to invest your time and your money. And people are influenced by that, so we've got to make sure that we continually improve that end-to-end student experience. When it comes to finances, we can't afford this year to make sure that we've not got absolutely full student rosters. And more importantly, we can't afford to have those students that are then going to leave before their end of the course. And students really need this connected home-from-home experience. And, we're not just talking about when it comes to the living accommodation. Some of the things we've got on the screen here, we're talking about anywhere in and around the campus. People expect this connected home-from-home experience. And in order to go and survive and then grow to build and thrive, we need to go and make sure that we provide it for them. But, we go to university, we go to college for a reason, and that's generally to learn something, to get an accreditation. So when it comes to learning, the pandemic has taught us that we absolutely need to be fully prepared to enable our students and enable our educators to be able to learn and teach from anywhere. The last 2 to 3 weeks have kind of shown that there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the easing of restrictions. We all feel a bit better about that, but none of us are daft enough to know that that's a potentially fragile hope that will last forever. We've absolutely got to be prepared to be able to react to make sure that we can enable that learning and teaching from anywhere experience. And when it comes to that experience, we're talking about a totally different set of needs now. We're talking about having to provide something for this Netflix generation. And when you translate that term, the Netflix generation, into learning, we're talking about, non-stop, on-demand access to high-quality learning content. We're talking about collaboration spaces. These need to be spun up in seconds. People don't have the patience that they used to. People want modern functionality, screencasting, file sharing, application sharing, and they want it on all different form factors, their own personal devices. Us within the university and college sector, we need that on our corporate devices as well. And then when you chuck in things like collaboration, increasingly more you're finding students are required to collaborate on the same project without having to be in the same physical space, but now they're having to collaborate with students from other institutes as well. So we've got different networks that we need to consider as well. So as providers of solutions within the education space, we all need to go and make sure that we've got that prerequisite infrastructure in place. If we've not got that, then we're severely limited in our ability to go and deliver that level of learning experience that we need to help ensure that our students stay for the entire duration of the course. And we need that because of these financial management pressures. Now, the first two things here, actually, these have got nothing at all to do with the pandemic at all. But the ones on the right-hand side do. The cost of delivering education, you can easily Google this. It goes up year on year on year, only incrementally, but it's significantly more expensive to go and educate a student now than it was 10 years ago. And that's not going to change. The cap on the tuition fees for domestic students at the higher education space, that's nothing new there, but that does give us a ceiling on how much revenue we can expect to bring into the organisation. But what has changed significantly is this impact of our ability to attract and retain international students. These are the high-value customers that we have. And clearly, the more countries that get added to the red list does affect our ability to earn money from these guys. So there's two ways of looking at that. You've clearly got students that are not going to be returning to their studies because actually they feel safer in their current country, but also people are now still starting to think about running their student experience, the whole 4 years of university, in their local country rather than investing in coming over to the UK, and that impacts our revenue stream. But another significant one is this non-term revenue. If you're lucky enough to have fantastic grounds or be in some sort of tourist hotspot, or have a really thriving business economy, you've probably been making significant revenue in the non-term time as well. We're talking about bed and breakfast accommodation, we're talking conference facilities. We've had a 12-month period, a full academic cycle, where we've not been able to earn anything here, and that's got a significant impact on our bottom line performance. But, we know that unless we're able to offer students this modern living and learning experience, unless we're able to offer fantastic conference facilities to our paying customers, then these financial pressures are just going to increase. And we get into this really nasty, vicious circle. And that's basically what, today is all about, really, is it's how we can go and break that vicious financial circle by delivering some cool stuff, by delivering smart living. And we're talking here about this home-from-home experience right across the campus. And what happens in the classroom, irrespective of location, we need to be able to go and provide that fantastic learning experience with all the tools that we need that our customers expect. And clearly we want to avoid being a nasty BBC News headline story. We've got to go and make sure that security is baked in. We've got to tie these disparate security systems together in order to improve that organisational security posture. So what James and Eddie and David are going to do today is going to show you some things that you might be thinking about considering about how you can go and achieve these objectives. So I'm going to shut up now, stop sharing, and pass over to you, James, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Rich. So what I'd like you to envision is a student has walked into their dorm room for the very first time. And of course, this is going to be that modern, smart, connected student who needs access to all those resources that Rich has spoken about there. And of course, they've brought with them a variety of different devices, starting out with the truly intelligent devices, their mobile phones and their laptops and PCs. And of course, it's very easy to get these devices connected and online. Of course, those of you that are using 8021X authentication in particular, so Eduroam or your own similar internal services, very simple and easy to get those devices online. Now, the next category of devices, not necessarily enhancing the education experience, but certainly required for this modern connected student as well, is going to be games consoles and those devices which have wired connectivity options. And of course, a lot of these won't necessarily understand 8021X at all. And those institutions which solely rely on this might have to find alternative mechanisms to get these devices online. And the final category of devices that I'd like to highlight here being those smart devices which just simply don't understand 8021X, don't understand how to connect with a wired port necessarily. And of course, we can break that down into those categories like the Kindle e-readers, which only understand open wireless networks or pre-shared key environments, and those devices which can take advantage of media streaming or casting services. So, your Alexas and your smart TVs, where the traditional approach that even if we can get a wired port into the back of these, is that devices can't communicate with each other on the same network. Now, when it comes to Eduroam services in particular, I did a bit of searching around, and what I've typically found is that it takes about a minute for an instructional video on how to get online with Eduroam. So what I'd like to do is show you a service called Ruckus Cloud Path, where we can not only aim to beat this 1 minute length of a video on how to get online, but also provide the student with the ability to get all those full range of devices online, those devices which only understand pre-shared key authentication by delivering each student their own personal, their own private pre-shared key, but also taking it to the next step and providing the student with their own private VLAN as well, such that when those devices which depend on media casting come online, the student can see those devices over the same wireless network, but that network is personal and private to them so that students can't see other students' devices as well. Now, of course, those of you who have already invested in Ruckus Cloud Path, this will be the technology that you're already well aware of. And you've probably got a workflow or a process that looks quite similar to this. So the student receives their acceptance letter or their email, which says, congratulations, you're going to university. They're then necessarily directed to set up their personal account. And from that point on, they can use that account to get onto the CloudPath onboarding portal, and they can be emailed their personal pre-shared key, which is, of course, ready to go on arrival. And of course, that onboarding portal, we can publish that out as an SSID inside the environment, but they can also access that onboarding portal from the internet so that the moment they walk through the door, they've already got that key ready to go. So let's have a look at a couple of videos which demonstrate this process. So let's hop online here into the settings and go to the university onboarding network. And I get a captive portal prompt at this point, taking me to CloudPath. So I'm going to press start. I'm going to say that I'm going to use the ANSecurity SSO service. And I'm just going to pause here as I enter my credentials. When it comes to credentials and Ruckus Cloud Path, there are a broad array of services that we can hook into, be those LDAP-based or Radius-based, of course, along with other services for modern authentication, such as SAML. So those of you that have invested in Azure AD, Okta, or Duo, for instance, we can plug straight into those authentication services as well, including even OAuth services. So if you want to perhaps use Facebook authentication for guests, we can hook into that as well. So let's crack on from there, get some username and passwords pasted into there and press continue. And you can see I'm very quickly, very easily provided with the pre-shared key there to then disconnect, poke the Apple iPhone networking stack a little bit, and get connected onto our CloudPath SSID by simply pasting in that pre-shared key. And once I'm joined onto that network, I've been dropped into my own private VLAN. And if I hop over to the information page there, we can see the IP address that we've been assigned. And what I'd like you to do is remember that IP address, because we'll pick up on it a little bit later in this presentation. So 10.128.8.100. Now, all this is very awesome. And in fact, that video from start to finish is just under a minute. So we've certainly met our goal there of providing a service which is at least as easy to get online as Eduroam, for instance. But there are a couple of things that we still need to understand and perhaps manage. So, the student requires some method of authentication. They need to interact with a service to go and get that pre-shared key. Maybe there's a better way that we can very seamlessly provide that pre-shared key to the student without even requiring them to go through an authentication service like that. And of course, we need to manage that account when the student leaves as well. We need to tap into perhaps the CloudPath API to go and revoke access from that student's user ID when they leave the institution. So there's a new feature which Ruckus have pushed out to the CloudPath service literally only over the last couple of weeks, is instead of linking the pre-shared key against the student's identity, we link it against the room that the student is going to be in instead. Now, because that key is linked against the room, we can email the student their personalized link to go and view their room's information, go and view their room's pre-shared key. And for those institutions that might be comfortable with emailing a pre-shared key, we can even do that as part of the process so that the student has got all the credentials, all the information that they need from the very get-go in a process which takes, 10 to 20 seconds instead of a full minute to get online. So let's have a look at how that process might look. Again, we're back to our iPhone here. We're going to hop into our mail. We can see that we've received the email, and inside that we've got our pre-shared key. So let's copy that, head into settings, jump onto the CloudPath network, paste that pre-shared key in, and that's us online. Now, again, as part of this very simple demonstration, if we take note of that IP address, 10.128.8.100, we'll be linking to that IP address a little bit later in this presentation. But as you can see, a process that's less than 20 seconds, very easy to get online, provide the student with secure wireless connectivity and a network that's personal and private to them. Let's have a closer look at that email that the student has been sent there. And you can see in there a link to a personal accommodation portal. And this allows the student to manage their wireless access, change their wireless key even. And you can see in the email there as well that we've been provided with the pre-shared key for not just the student, but also guest access as well. So if the student has a visitor staying with them over the course of the weekend, for instance, they can provide that key to them and perhaps even drop that guest into a completely separate network so that there's no potential for compromise of the student's own devices through the Wi-Fi. Now, when it comes to that link, of course, there's a nice GUID embedded inside that. That's used as the authentication mechanism. And by clicking on that, you're taking to the student's personal portal. And Ruckus are currently working to expand the feature set of this portal. And right now we can see and change the Wi-Fi code as well as for the student, but also the guest as well. Now, when it comes to CloudPath, it truly is an infinitely flexible service for getting devices onto the wired and wireless networks. So how about we look at how this might be applied to guest access as well? And in this environment, perhaps as the institution hosts B&B guests, as each guest checks in, they're provided perhaps with a slip of paper or again an email with a personalized voucher code, and that code is used to get onto the wireless. A nice way, of course, of preventing users who are just walking along the street from hooking into your wireless access. Let's have a look at how that might, how this guest service might look in screenshots here. So we're going to start out at the captive portal. We're going to accept the terms and conditions of the service, press start. We're then going to identify ourselves as a guest using a shared passkey, and we're then prompted for that shared passkey that we can enter. And as I mentioned, we can deliver this to the user in a variety of methods, and perhaps that shared passkey is single use and only valid for 24 hours, or perhaps that shared passkey is valid for multiple devices over a course of a number of weeks. Loads of different options on how we actually customize this portal and get our users online. So from that step, we're then going to prompt the user for a first name, last name, and email address. And this, of course, is bound to the IP address inside the CloudPath service, such that if we have any instances of misuse of the service, we've got some option of actually tracing that back to the user. And again, this is an entirely customizable option. So if an institution isn't keen on doing that, perhaps for privacy concerns, we can remove that out of the onboarding process as well. Now that final step, congratulations, you're now connected. Effectively here, a silent message has been sent back to the Ruckus controller to state, allow this MAC address onto the network for the next 24 hours. But we could also use this screen as an opportunity to provide the user with a pre-shared key as well, such that instead of being just hooking into an open wireless network, that user can be onboarded onto a secure wireless network with encryption between the access point and the client, of course. And as I mentioned, this workflow is absolutely infinitely customizable. We can see a screenshot there on the left-hand side of how that might look to the administrator for that guest workflow. And on the right-hand side, we've then got a variety of different options that we can build into that workflow, with plenty more, of course, available inside the service. I mentioned already integration to a variety of authentication mechanisms, so LDAP, Radius, SAML, and OAuth. And of course, we can even get CloudPath to communicate with other services outside itself, with messages going out via REST or perhaps syslog, allowing us to integrate CloudPath into all manner of services and systems. Now, when it comes to really pushing the limits further, those of you that know me well will be aware that I'm really quite keen on PowerShell as a cross-platform scripting language delivered by Microsoft. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'd like to introduce you to perhaps something slightly different called Node-RED. And this is a service that was originally developed by IBM as a nice graphical way of interacting with web services and in fact, all manner of services. So my demonstration here is going to be bulk creating the identities inside the CloudPath database for that option number 2, for that room-based service. And in this short demonstration here, you can see that inside the CloudPath web service, we've got no rooms created, no units created. If I hop into Node-RED, press go on our process, we can see a series of debug messages output there, and our rooms have been generated. Now, let's break this down into its component parts and see what's making this automation service possible. And of course, we're starting out with a list of the users and their rooms. And this might be generated by your management information system or your student information services. In this case, just a CSV, but of course, we can hook into databases directly as well. Now, that flow that you saw there, of course, is comprised of multiple components. So I've broken it down into its 3 key parts here, starting out with authentication into CloudPath. So authentication starting out with username, password, and API key. CloudPath then returns to us a token, which is used for all future communications with CloudPath, with an expiration date, of course, inside there as well. Next up, we're going to read that CSV. We're going to parse it into the format that CloudPath is expecting. And again, you can see on the left-hand side a nice graphical way of parsing that information. And we've also got the opportunity, as part of that pre-shared key and as part of that CSV, to inject additional information like the VLAN ID, like the DPSK or pre-shared key for the student straight into that CSV. The final step, of course, then is posting that message back to CloudPath. So providing CloudPath with that information, the format that it's expecting to go and programmatically generate all those rooms. Lots of flexibility, lots of options with Node-RED. And what we've actually done with a couple of institutions now is built features in Node-RED or indeed with PowerShell scripts that don't necessarily exist in CloudPath natively, in particular for the automated management of students' identities and rooms inside CloudPath. So if you do have some services that you would like to perhaps integrate with or perhaps build into CloudPath, do get in touch with us and we can see what we can help out with there through PowerShell, Node-RED, or indeed other services as well. So this is all very cool. What's actually made it possible? What's behind the curtain, as it were? So starting out with the Ruckus Smart Zone network controllers. Now, it is key to point out that this is a Ruckus-specific technology for this pre-shared key and this per-user VLAN environment. It does indeed require a Ruckus Smart Zone network controller. In this case, available as both a physical and a virtual appliance. And we'll have a look at the latest updates to the Smart Zone controllers in a couple of minutes' time. Next up is then the Ruckus Cloud Path itself, deliverable as a SaaS service online, or indeed an on-prem service as well, highly available, hosted in AWS, I believe, as an online service. And it really binds together the authentication, those workflows, and the DPSKs or the pre-shared keys with the VLAN IDs, all inside one nicely wrapped service. Next up, of course, you're going to require network switches which can support the number of VLAN IDs required. So, of course, if you've got 1,000 students at a minimum, you're going to need 1,000 VLAN IDs. We've got a lot of experience here using scripts to generate the configurations and push them into a variety of switch manufacturers to really smooth out the deployment. And of course, those institutions which might have over the kind of 4,094 VLAN limit that exists, there are other options that we can look to deploy using Smart Zone controllers in data plane mode, where we tunnel traffic over the network switches to overcome these otherwise limiting factors. When it comes to DHCP, of course, if we've got 1,000 VLANs, we're going to need 1,000 DHCP servers. And again, here we've created scripts to interact with the Microsoft DHCP server and have found it quite comfortably handling many thousands of DHCP scopes off a single server. So absolutely no worries there. And then when it comes to the wireless access points themselves, these features which I've demonstrated here exist in the Wi-Fi 5 Wave 1 access points, so AC Wave 1 and higher. So if you've got, for instance, R550s, R500s or R600s, we can hook into those access points for this. And of course, it's available in all access point models after that. So the Wi-Fi 5 Wave 2 access points, and of course, the latest generation of Wi-Fi 6 APs. And then finally, of course, you're going to need a firewall which can handle the number of virtual interfaces and the number of IP helpers. And here, for instance, we've rated the PA850 model from Palo Alto Networks for up to 500 users using this service with per user VLAN allocation. And there are, of course, plenty of other firewall vendors out there which we can also explore if you've already got a model that you would like to continue using for this service. So when it comes to actually securing this experience to the students, there are a number of applications which run over the network, which are perhaps purely malicious in nature that we should be blocking access to, not just for the protection of the students, but also for the protection of the organization's intellectual property as well. We've seen a number of instances now where organizations have been compromised through student or staff member accounts, which have then led to the leaking of perhaps personal and sensitive data, or of course, as a variety of organizations have been reporting over the last couple of months, threat actors on a nation state level who are looking for valuable research into coronavirus, for instance, as well. So a lot of institutions, I would like to believe, at a minimum, are blocking access to BitTorrent networks, of course, prone to misuse, prone to malicious acts on BitTorrent. And the risk rating score that you can see there at the top left-hand corner with a number 5, this being a number 5 risk application from Palo Alto Networks. And we'll have a look at a couple of other risk scores here as well. The next one, this one might be a little bit of a surprise to you, but certainly over the last couple of months, we've seen a number of institutions have students actually engage in Bitcoin mining using what is effectively free electricity inside their student halls. So free at point of use to those students. All they really need is something with a big load of GPU inside and a big load of compute inside, and they can effectively mine Bitcoin using the university's electricity. And here we've engaged with a number of institutions to actively block access to Bitcoin mining applications to at least limit the impact of that. Next up is access to the Tor network. And of course, again, there are perfectly legitimate uses for the Tor network, particularly, of course, in countries which are more restrictive on access to the media, for instance. But here we've started seeing Tor being used as a tunneling mechanism for, again, threat actors to exploit and steal information down. So if you're perhaps already using a data loss prevention service to tag your critical information, consider, are there options, are there technologies which can be used to avoid those protections that you've already got in place, like the Tor network, like VPNs out to other services. And of course, threat actors looking to deliver malware onto your computers, if they discover that they can't exfiltrate these files via more traditional methods, will fall back to these more advanced methods to start stealing that data. Now, we've got 2 4s and a 5 there. Let's look at something which is very common. And of course, without it, we wouldn't have the internet function in the way that we're aware now. So DNS. And as a very new, very emerging type of threat, what we've actually started seeing is DNS being used as a mechanism to also exfiltrate data, also conduct command and control operations against a computer. Because, of course, DNS is capable of two-way data transfer. And you might be thinking, seriously, James, DNS, this can't be real. This is the stuff of science fiction. And there I would point you at a service called DNS Cat 2. Of course, plenty of other tools and techniques out there on the internet. But if you run a Google search for DNS Cat 2, you'll find freely published out on GitHub, a service which can be used to tunnel traffic over DNS and effectively use it as a command and control channel to remotely access those machines which are vulnerable to compromise, of course. And here, a couple of screenshots from our war games that we ran inside the ANSecurity lab last year, using a combination of DNS Cat 2 and a threat emulation toolkit known as ADHD to reach into a computer, establish a command and control session, and then use DNS as the transport mechanism to steal a virtual hard disk file. And you might be thinking again, seriously, is this real? And of course, a lot of the firewall vendors have started to wake up to this reality and have started building signatures inside the firewalls to inspect DNS traffic, look for the very suspect behavior, and quite easy to detect if you know what you're looking for, patterns for DNS command and control traffic. And of course, anything that we can detect, we can, of course, block and provide alerts to our network administrators to go and investigate a device, go and remediate whatever might be up with it. Now, the final aspect that I'd like to touch on when it comes to securing the student's experience and securing the secrets and the information and the intellectual property that organizations might hold is, of course, access to URL filtering. And again, education institutions, in particular higher education, has always been about the freedom of access to the knowledge of the internet. And here I really see a 3-tier internet evolving, where we've got the first tier of the internet with the sites that we all know and love, the perfectly legitimate internet. The second tier then being the internet of content that we should perhaps not be allowing access to if for secondary school students or perhaps further education students. But if we were to block access to those sites for higher education, again, we might have some issues with the students knocking at the door asking what's going on. But the final third tier of the internet then being the purely malicious internet, the internet of command and control sites, the internet of sites which deliver malware or hacking content. And here I do ask you to start considering, should we be blocking access to these sites to prevent the compromise and data exfiltration stories that we've heard so much about? Again, calling out cryptocurrency here, we are seeing it on the rise using what is effectively free electricity. So please do have a look at your firewall logs, have a look at your application identification services and see if this is heading over your networks. When it comes to sites that count as newly registered domains, what we've seen here is threat actors spinning up a new domain for perhaps just a couple of days. And before content inspection can actually go and identify what the nature of this site is, they've used it for malicious purposes, used it to as a mechanism for data to be exfiltrated via, and then shut the site down. And here we would recommend that organizations use a newly registered domains category to block access to sites that perhaps have only been registered in the last 30, 60, or 90 days. And when it comes to phishing, we're also seeing a complete rise, as Rich mentioned earlier in the presentation, in successful phishing campaigns. And we still very much see multi-factor authentication as being the kind of the core mechanism to stop phishing attacks dead in the water. But another mechanism that will be built into Palo Alto Networks firewalls in particular, and of course other firewall vendors have been looking at it, is if you can engage in SSL and TLS decryption, perhaps for the machines which are actually owned by the institution and the machines which you can put the certificate authorities onto of your own custom design. Here we can inspect the traffic that's going out to websites and compare the usernames and passwords that might be built in that traffic against your own internal directory. And if we see credentials going out to sites that haven't been explicitly allowed, we can block that transmission of the credentials, thereby preventing the phishers from obtaining those credentials in the first place. So lots of opportunities to use URL filtering here in a more modern fashion, which cuts off access to the purely malicious nature of the internet. Now, earlier I mentioned that user which was being mapped to the IP address of 10.128.8.100. And through CloudPath, what we've actually done here is pushed information into our Palo Alto firewall to map that identity to a username. So traditional firewalls will, of course, rely on the user authenticating to the firewall directly, or perhaps the scraping of Active Directory information as the sole mechanism of linking users to IP addresses. But here with our Palo Alto firewalls, we've got a full spectrum of options to map IP addresses to actual identities. So in that case, we're using the API to do it. Of course, we can still scrape information out of Active Directory logs to link IP addresses to users. Those of you who have another NAC service, which is perhaps handling wired authentication, quite a lot of them will kick out a syslog message which maps IP addresses to identities. And again, here we can look at integrating those services, enabling the identification of users based upon syslog messages inside the Palo Alto firewalls. And of course, with this information, if we receive a cease and desist order, if we receive notification that an IP address has been seen acting maliciously, we might get in that information the source IP address, the source port, and a time index that that malicious act was seen. And we can take that and plug it into our Palo Alto firewall to go and identify which user was actually involved at that point. So let's head over to the monitor tab there. We're in the URL filtering logs. I've already composed this as a query for the firewall logs, so let's paste that in. Run a little search inside the firewall, scroll over there to the right-hand side, and we've got the source IP address, so the IP address that was hidden behind NAT. But of course, we've also got the source user. So we can see Jean-Luc Picard was reaching out to a website that perhaps he shouldn't have been at that point in time. So I ask us here, have we actually solved our problem? Well, our students with devices which are intelligent, we can easily get those online already. But what we've actually started to see is a number of Android manufacturers in particular not necessarily support 802.1x authentication, the mechanism that we might expect. And occasionally, of course, that can break. We've also seen with the rise of Android 11, some of the mechanisms that we use to get users onto 802.1x being taken away as part of the actual feature set inside Android 11. So with pre-shared key-based authentication, yes, very easy to get these devices online. The same, of course, applies to games consoles. Not only can we connect them up via wired access, but we've now also got the option to use wireless access as well. And because the student is now wrapped up inside their own private VLAN, we can use casting services as well. So we can stream media from our laptop, from our games console to our smart TV or smart speaker to enable these modern experiences which the students are so very much kind of used to from a home side of things. So switching gears now, in speaking with a lot of you over the last couple of months, there's been a keen interest in what's the latest hardware that's come out from Ruckus, what's the latest updates there. And of course, Wi-Fi 6 being the key one that everyone is talking about when it comes to wireless access. 6 kind of core features which have built into Wi-Fi 6, which have really enhanced the experience for everyone. And whilst the main kind of goal of Wi-Fi 5 in particular was about enhancing bandwidth, Wi-Fi 6 is all about improving the quality, improving the stability, and even bringing about battery life improvements for wireless devices. So if I call out just 3 of those features in detail, starting out with OFDMA, to me at least, this is probably the single most important new feature. And OFDMA allows the wireless access point to take perhaps a 40 or an 80 megahertz wide channel and splice it up into individual chunks. So that if we've got a single device that is communicating with the wireless access point in Wi-Fi 5, that entire chunk of bandwidth is assigned to just one single client. With Wi-Fi 6 instead, we get OFDMA, which allows the splicing up of that bandwidth, allowing the wireless client to communicate the wireless access point to communicate with multiple wireless clients at the same time. And of course, this is very handy for the small sized chunks of traffic being spliced up and sent out there over the airwaves. One of the ways to envision this is if you've got a motorway and we've got one single lorry traveling down a single lane of that motorway, taking one single packet of traffic out to a single client. That's what we would see with Wi-Fi 5. Whereas with Wi-Fi 6, we can open up all 3 or 4 lanes of that motorway so that the access point can communicate with those lorries, with those packets of traffic to multiple clients at multiple destinations, all at the same time. Next up, when it comes to 2.4 gigahertz connectivity, you might be surprised to know that Wi-Fi 5 didn't actually bring about very much improvement for 2.4 gigahertz whatsoever. And in fact, many wireless access points are effectively operating in kind of M-class Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi 4 when it comes to 2.4 gigahertz. Wi-Fi 6 actually expands all of these new features down to 2.4 gigahertz as well, such that we can operate on a larger number of bands and make the most efficient use of the bandwidth that's available to us. And of course, in the future, we're going to see the opening up of 6 gigahertz in particular as well to Wi-Fi with the newer wireless access points as they come out. The final feature that I'd like to highlight is known as target wait time. And target wait time really is about bringing about additional power efficiency savings and gains for our end user devices. And with target wait time, the access point can actually instruct the client to sleep its wireless radio for an extended period of time if that access point doesn't have any more data for it. And I've actually seen studies which have seen up to 30 minutes or even an hour additional on the battery life of a typical mobile phone if that mobile phone is using Wi-Fi 6 chipsets, using Wi-Fi 6 antennas, and can take advantage of these features, of course. Now, the 3 others inside there, 1024 QAM, this is all about opening up higher bit rates to our clients. Multi-user MIMO on Wi-Fi 5, multi-user MIMO is all about downloading information to the client. In Wi-Fi 6, it opens it up to the other way as well, such that clients with larger bandwidth requirements can use multiple radios, use multiple antennas to talk to a single access point. And BSS coloring then all being about providing our access points with a unique identifier such that environments which have a high overlap of channels can be smoothed out a little bit more, allowing a client to communicate with just the access point that it's expecting to communicate with, instead of receiving all the noise and all the interference from additional access points in the local area. When it comes to the Wi-Fi 6 hardware from Ruckus, we've had an almost complete refresh here. So the R550s being the access point model that we would typically deploy into student hall areas. In recent Wi-Fi surveys, I've seen it quite comfortably handle between 4 and 5 student rooms, for instance. The R650 being for our larger auditoriums, so our spaces where we might have 30, 40 users with perhaps a couple of hundred clients accessing the wireless access point at one time. And then the R750 being those ultra high density environments, so large auditoriums, large sports halls, large spaces in particular. When it comes to the wall plate access points here, we've got the H550. A nice thing about the H550 being is it quite comfortably fits over the top of a standard wall jack, and can then have the connectivity provided from the access point to a number of other clients with the ports on the underside. And in addition, if we provide this access point with PoE plus power, one of those 4 1 gigabit ports on the underside that you see there can also deliver PoE out as well. And this, of course, is very handy for powering VoIP phones and such like. What we've actually seen, in particular in the very startup of the pandemic, is that institutions were sending users home with H550s, along with their desk phone, along with their desktop computer, and establishing a tunnel between the H550 back to a Ruckus Smart Zone controller's data plane, giving the workers the work from home experience in these cases, allowing them to have wired connectivity back into their home institution, allowing them to use devices like VoIP phones, which they might not typically be able to do so down a VPN. When it comes to outdoor access points, again, we've seen a refresh here with the T350 replacing the T310, this being the optimal access point for gardens and smaller spaces, whilst the T750 is again designed for your large sports fields and much wider spaces, which might have many hundreds or even thousands of clients hanging off. When it comes to the controllers, Ruckus have refreshed the Smart Zone controller lineup. And originally we would describe this as a wireless LAN controller, but now we're really moving towards the notion of a network controller instead, with Ruckus embedding the ability to manage ICX network switches into the controller as well, providing a single management plane for not just your Ruckus wireless access points, but also your Ruckus network switches too. One of the kind of core features to the controller that I mentioned earlier is the built-in data plane. And this really does simplify the deployment of these per user VLAN environments. So instead of having to tag the traffic for all these additional VLANs across your entire environment, all the way from the firewall to the access point itself, with this data plane, we can tunnel the traffic that's coming out of the access point back directly to the Smart Zone controller, and only make those additional configuration changes on the switches between your Smart Zone controllers, your firewalls, and the rest of your core infrastructure. Now, because of this notion of using the controller in a data plane mode, and because of this opening up of potentially higher bandwidths to the controller, along with the 4 1 gigabit ports on the front there, you can also see 4 10 gigabit SFP plus cages as well. So Ruckus is really opening up these controllers to high bandwidth environments. And it's also available as a virtual appliance, and of course, multiple appliances can be clustered together for an HA service. When it comes to the network switches, Ruckus have been far from stagnant here, as we've seen with some switching vendors, by integrating a series of new features and really quite innovative kind of port densities into their switches. So the 7150 series, absolutely ideal for access layer switches, and the 7550 series being a really optimal switch at the core and aggregation layer, as a model which introduces 10 gigabit connectivity at a very competitive price point. When it comes to the 7150s there, Ruckus have introduced the ZP series, and this series of switches is all about delivering multi-gigabit Ethernet. So 2.5 gigabit Ethernet with 16 ports on that 48 port on the left switch on the left-hand side. And not only PoE plus delivery, but up to 90 watts of power delivery. These switches are all about providing that connectivity and power, which is going to be required for the next generation of Wi-Fi 7 access points, and also 4 and 8K pan tilt zoom CCTV cameras. We've also got a 10-port switch there on the right-hand side from Ruckus, again, with 10 ports of multi-gigabit Ethernet with 2.5 gigabits on 8 of the ports, and then up to 10 gigabit Ethernet on 2 of the additional ports. When it comes to the more traditional 7150 series from Ruckus with PoE plus delivery, one of the innovative features that we've seen here is a fanless PoE mode. So these switches through the command line can have their power output dropped to 150 watts, which then allows them to power up to 150 watts of power delivery, but without the fans inside the switch spinning. So perhaps if you've got some switches inside particularly sensitive areas or areas where we might not want to be making too much noise, that's a perfect model, perfect option for those environments. And then finally, the 7550 series switches. There's two models which are fiber aggregation switches in this lineup, one of them being the 48 F model. And here we get 12 ports of 10 gigabit SFP plus, and then 36 ports of 1 gigabit SFP connectivity on the front. And we see this being used by those organizations that are finding increasing bandwidth demands in a smaller part of their infrastructure and exploiting that 10 gigabit connectivity, whilst also finding that a large number of their switches are still quite happily trucking along with 1 gigabit connectivity. And perhaps they can't envision a future where those switches would need greater throughputs than 1 gigabit. So a nice blend of ports here, which enables, again, a very competitive price point for this model of switch. So that's all from me for now. I'm now going to hand over to Eddie from Ruckus CommScope, who's going to talk to us about Ruckus Analytics. Eddie.
Thank you, James. Certainly a lot of food for thought there. So people will be perhaps looking through these recordings late at night, trying to digest a lot of that good information there. Before I launch into the demo of Ruckus Analytics, a brief introduction into what it actually is. So Ruckus Analytics, or RA as we really term it normally, so abbreviated down to RA, it's a cloud-based subscription service, and it's all about baselining and proactively monitoring your Ruckus network. As a cloud subscription service, it's not available as on-premise appliance hardware or as a virtual machine like you might get with the Smart Zone controllers, for example. It is just a cloud-based service at this point in time. It supports both our APs and our ICX switches, and it works with our Smart Zone controller and also with our Ruckus Cloud Managed Networking. So whether you're using a Smart Zone, which is very granular in terms of its controls management, or our simpler sort of IT Live cloud managed platform for APs and ICX switches, it works with both of those. And it basically consumes the data to provide all the information that we'll take a look at. The licensing is per AP or switch that you actually want to be monitored within RA. This gives you a bit of flexibility in terms of deployment, because there may only be certain high or areas of high importance that you want to have monitored, or maybe you have some budget restraints that mean that you can't roll it out across your entire estate in one go. So that flexibility of being able to actually license it per AP or switch is quite useful. In terms of actually using RA and where it kind of fits into the organization, I liken it to having an additional help desk person who's sitting there monitoring your network 24/7 and then flagging issues on the network. So it's basically baselining it and looking at changes in behavior of the network, and then flagging issues. And we call those issues incidents. That's what it's raising. And it's generating these incidents with a priority. So they're prioritized between P1, which is the most severe, to P4, which is more or less a notification. You can also integrate it with external help desk systems using web forms integration as well. So if you want to have help desk tickets created on your help desk system when an incident is created within RA, then you can also achieve that. And RA, it's not just a simple event sort of monitoring or alerting tool. It doesn't just take an event like an AP's gone down and send you an alert about that. It's using those buzzwords of machine learning and AI to actually take lots of factors into consideration when creating incidents and prioritizing them. So that's how long has the incident been going on for, how many clients, how many APs are affected by that will determine the priority. So sometimes you'll have incidents which look very similar in their nature, but they may actually have different priorities assigned to them. Let me share my screen, and it's a pretty brief session for 10 minutes to actually cover all of its features, but I'll try and do the best job that I can in that time frame. So dashboard view is where you start. So that's your entry point. Looks fairly familiar with other Ruckus products. So you've got a menu system down the left here. Along the top here, you can, for example, filter by date, filter by categories as well, and auto update the dashboard if you want to. And there's also a search feature here. So if you want to search and drill down to particular clients or particular AP's health, then you can do that from the dashboard as well. We've got a summary here, scrolling summary of how many APs, active wireless LANs, clients as well that have been detected. And this is actually a demo system. So it's a demo system which has beta builds pushed to it. So you may see in various places like here, you may see that it's tagged as beta. So be aware that sometimes the data isn't always populated correctly, and it looks probably a little bit more complex with a lot more incidents than you'd expect on a normal network. I like this network history view because this gives you a bit of an overview of how many clients, for example, you've had connected over different time periods, and also shows you how many clients have been impacted by incidents that have been detected. So that's quite a useful view as a summary. These are the actual incidents down here, the P1 to P4 incidents. You can get a more detailed list of that if you want to, and you can see as I hover over them, it gives me a bit of a summary of that incident in terms of root cause. But these incidents of P1 to P4 are also classified into different buckets. So they can be related to connectivity, performance, or infrastructure. So infrastructure being typically connectivity between the AP and the controller that you're actually using. If I don't want to see all the incidents, I can simply filter them down. So if I click on one of these, for example, you'll see that will take away the P1 incidents, or I can take away the P2 as well. So it's quite easy to filter down and sort of restrict this list of views. So if you're only interested in P1s, you can see those, for example. Then in the center here, we've got two different views. So these views, the first one here, we're seeing a hierarchy or a circle diagram. So for most customers, they'd only see sort of one main circle within here, indicating the incidence and the severity. So a circle is typically a cluster or controller cluster of one or more smart zone nodes. In this case, because it's a lab system, we've actually got lots of different controllers on here. So that's why we've got many circles in here. But what these do is just give you that nice little drill down view of where the incidents are actually happening on your network. So we can see on this controller here, we've got several instances of different priorities. And what I could actually do is to drill down to a particular AP group, and you'll see here it's taking me down to that particular location. And I've actually got within the AP group here, I've actually got a P2 incident within that particular group here, and it's drilled out, and also a P4 incident there as well. So it's nice and easy to drill down to find out, where those incidents are actually occurring on your network. The other view we have here, which is currently a beta feature, is the topology view as well. So what this does is allow you to get a sort of a nice little linked view of what's connected in your network. So how switches are connected together, what switches you have in network, and what APs are connected. So I can actually hover over the AP, it will give me some information about that AP, and it will also give me the connection information as to which switch and port it's connected to, as well as which port on the access point. So a couple of useful views there. If we take a look at the incidents themselves, so you've got quite a few variety of incidents from P1 to P4 listed here. If I just pick one of these out here, this will actually take me to the incident details. And what we have here is a P1 incident where we've got a high failure of connections between the AP and the controller. And what this does is collate some nice data. So what this can kind of show me, is it related to specific models of AP? Is it specific firmware versions? Is it particular bands? Is it particular client types, and so on? So I can see here which APs are actually affected by the incident, which software versions they're running, what's actually caused it in terms of event, and some other things there as well. So it's quite nice, especially when you're looking at client events. Is it related just to Apple iPhones running a particular version? Is it related to particular APs? Is it only on the 2.4 gig band? So that's like a nice piece of information about collating what may be causing an event. You can see on the right-hand side here, it's actually giving me root cause analysis. So every incident, we actually try to give some information about what may be causing that particular incident, and also giving you some potential solutions to that incident. So in this case, it's giving you some information about how to test connectivity between the AP and the controller. For client connectivity issues, it may be related to coverage, for example. It may say that you haven't got enough APs, therefore clients aren't able to successfully roam or have very low signal strength. And you can also then drill down to the devices that are affected by the particular incident and look at their individual health information as well here. So a good deal of information about particular incidents. And let me just pick another one that may be sort of useful. I'll maybe mention a couple of them as I go down. So we've got some service availability in terms of infrastructure here. So VLAN mismatch. So what this is actually showing you is either between switches or between switches and APs if you've got a mismatch in the VLANs that are tagged or trunked between those devices. So here we can see on the left-hand side, this switch has got VLAN 50 and 100, whereas the switch on the right-hand side in that port has got those two VLANs plus another two VLANs also on there. So it's pulling up a VLAN mismatch, saying that, well, on one side you've got VLAN 50 and 100, on the other you've got these two additional VLANs which aren't tagged on the switch on the left-hand side. So, for any of you guys, you know that VLANs tend to, or VLAN issues tend to cause a lot of issues within your networks. So this is a pretty useful incident in terms of flagging those if you're not tagging or trunking those VLANs correctly across your infrastructure. Some of the other things that, in terms of time, I don't have time to cover, but you'll see things like connection issues, time to connect. So it takes clients a long time to connect, for example, as well. We have issues about coverage potentially here as well. So if you've got insufficient coverage. And the other thing as well, this will also sort of highlight issues related, to things like DHCP. So it's not just, we're not going to pull up issues related specifically to Cisco or other, infrastructure, but general network services, we will pull up information about that as well here. So we've got information that, a number of clients are being affected by DHCP failures. And we can see down here that I've got 14 of my 143 clients are being affected by DHCP issues. And then I can actually get a list of those clients. And if I want to, then I can actually drill down to an individual client to see the details. And if any of you are familiar with our visual connection diagnostics, you actually get that in here as well. So you can actually see where it's actually failed. So for some reason here, in this case, the AP, after the client has done a DHCP discover, the AP is actually deauthenticating the client. So it's a little bit of a strange one, Matt, see if they're similar. Yeah. So something strange to investigate there in terms of the client is being deauthenticated. The other things that you can typically see here are things like roaming events for quality of the connection and any network incidents as well against those clients. So that's really the health part of it. So you can see there that this has moved me down from the dashboard to the analytics section. Here I can see the detailed list of incidents. I can also see this health view of the network as well. So I can see how many successful connections, failed connections, the average time to connect as well. And if I click on one of these buckets, for example, failed connections, this will actually break down what's actually causing those connection failures or where they're actually occurring. So I can see here I've got some EAP failures, so that's typically in the four-way handshake, could be incorrect dynamic pre-shared keys. I've got some radius failures, maybe we're not able to talk to a radius server, maybe it's unavailable for some reason. And we've also got a lot of those DHCP failures there as well. So nice breakdown for these different, if it's successful connections or failed connections. And then we also have a bunch of graphs which show you different SLAs that you can customize the SLAs for as well. So if you're interested in client throughput and you're specifying that the client throughput needs to be at least 30 megabits per second, you can see how many of your clients actually meet that particular SLA level. So you can do that for different types of things like AP capacity and other sort of key performance indicators that we're monitoring there as well. So things like AP uptime or connection to the controller as well. So lots of interesting graphs. And this is the overview. You can also drill down if you want to graph specifically to those different buckets like performance, infrastructure, and connectivity as well. Something that's also in beta, something new that's coming in is config change monitoring as well and baselining. So what this will do is actually show you how the network was performing before the changes to configuration were made and how it's performing after configurations were actually made. So things like, are you having APs that are disconnecting or rebooting? Are you having clients that are failing to connect? Are they taking longer to get DHCP? Has the AP capacity dropped and so on? So, lots of information here, how your network's actually changed after you've applied different configurations to it. So, very useful if you need to sort of change those or back them out. Another feature which is in beta at the moment is this service validation. So this gives you the ability to create tests which run as a virtual client on the AP. And if I just pull up one of these tests here, the results of it. So basically what it can do is it can test authentication association, it can test DHCP, it can test DNS, it can do a ping, a trace route, and also a performance test. So it's very useful in terms of if you have an area of your network that doesn't seem to be performing very well or clients are reporting issues, but you can get a bird's eye view of that by running this service validation. We're also adding service validation for cause calling as well. So what we're going to be doing initially is rolling this out for Zoom calls. So what it does is to create a Zoom meeting and you invite people to it. And then what it would do is actually to baseline what the quality of that Zoom meeting was. And in subsequent releases, we'll also be doing that for Teams. So these first parts are all related to the network analytics. It's all about what's going on in your network. It's about creating those incidents intelligently to highlight to you what's really important, what potentially isn't working as well on your network, or what's changed on your network and causing issues. The last part is really related to reporting. So there's also a lot of very detailed CAM reports that you can export or download as CSV if you want the raw data. So these reports give you a lot of detailed information. So whether you're just looking at, at an overview as we have here of the network, events, alarms, top APs by utilization, what wireless LANs you're running and so on. We may want to look at more detailed reports on controllers or the wireless LANs or client health, a whole load of pre-canned reports there. That's basically using all the data that's actually coming from the controllers themselves. And what you can do is, if there's a report that doesn't meet your particular need, what you can actually do is to use the Data Explorer to create your own custom reports as well. So you have these, what we call data cubes. You can basically take these and actually create your own custom reports. And they could be bar charts, they could be line charts, they could be pure text and everything else. So it's a very powerful tool. You've got the proactive analytics part of it, and you also have this detailed and comprehensive reporting as well. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie. So last bit from me, just on how with these new Wi-Fi 6 access points from Ruckus, the connectivity doesn't just stop at Wi-Fi. Ruckus have actually built into almost all of the models an IoT radio, so selectable between Zigbee and Bluetooth as the two main options at the moment. Now, when it comes to Zigbee connectivity, you might already be familiar with it with kind of smart home devices. So in particular, Philips Hue, for example, runs over the Zigbee protocol. And here with this connectivity, when combined with the Ruckus IoT suite as a virtual machine that can be stood up alongside the smart zone controllers, what we can actually start to do is expand these additional types of devices into our Ruckus network, have a single pane of glass to manage these devices as well. This also includes Bluetooth Low Energy, which in a beacon format has brilliant applications for wayfinding and the geotagging of devices as well. So if you're perhaps in an environment where you've got some high value devices that you would like to keep track of, what we can now look to do is put tags on these, which will beacon out to the access points to provide real-time location tracking for those devices. And you might be thinking, surely this IoT thing will never catch on. But in fact, over the last couple of months in doing Wi-Fi surveys at a variety of institutions, I've actually found they've been adopting IoT technologies and these IoT radios without even realizing it. In one case, they were deploying Acer Abloy door locks. These door locks run over Zigbee, and to add insult to injury, they were actually installing Acer Abloy effective access points right alongside their Ruckus wireless access points, which of course already had the Zigbee radios built inside them. So this technology, this radio is already built into the Wi-Fi 6 access point. So it's a perfect opportunity to, instead of investing in additional infrastructure, instead of having to pull an additional network cable and manage an additional network switch port, to just build these technologies straight into the access points that you're already investing in. I saw another institution where they were actually doing wired connectivity into temperature and environment sensors. This was actually running over Wi-Fi and then the wired connectivity for power into those devices. And again, here they were kind of limiting their scope of options by using Wi-Fi and mains power. Whereas there are a lot of devices out there, such as the example there on the right-hand side, which will provide temperature and humidity data with a battery powering the device for up to a year, if not longer, which can hook into Zigbee radios, again, via the Ruckus wireless access points that you've already got. And of course, instead of having that wired connectivity, having to deliver that power into those devices, they could, of course, just deploy these in a broader range of instances, a broader range of environments, not having to consider the placement of electrical sockets. Now, IoT really branches out into a broad range of technology areas, as is relevant to our buildings, as is relevant to the environments that we look to manage. And of course, that can include things like power control of devices, perhaps relays which control fans. Door locks and switches, of course, is a very common example there. When it comes to door locks, Ruckus have actually natively integrated with ASA Abloy and other vendors to eliminate the need to deploy additional radios, deploy additional access points to cover these always online door locks. And of course, by combining services like motion sensors and lighting, we can enhance the security posture of our buildings by turning on the lights when we detect motion, and also doing that in some more innovative ways as well, linking into CCTV camera services. Geolocation I've already mentioned with Bluetooth Low Energy, and for those of you with particularly large campuses might find that wayfinding applications, so if you perhaps host an app which students can install on their Android or iOS device, that might include some navigation features to get the student to the right room for their lectures, getting the student to the right rooms for their sports hall, or for instance as well. And those environment sensors, lots of opportunities to link into environment monitoring, temperature and humidity being the most common one that we see, but also in particular with an interest in the pandemic and managing the environments courtesy of that. We've seen some institutions deploy CO2 sensors now. And of course, an increase in CO2 can be linked to a decrease in ventilation. So if a room has an option to open up some windows, perhaps automatically, or maybe even send a push notification to a user inside that room, we can take that environment sensing information and improve that environment for the student by increasing the airflow into that room, and also hoping to bring in that clean air, which can, of course, is so effective against COVID-19. Now, this really does open up a world of possibility, and I mentioned earlier the option of linking motion sensors to lighting, but how about instead of having a kind of a dumb light bulb that just turns on, we make it one of these smart, intelligent light bulbs that has the opportunity to change its color throughout the course of the day. So instead of the motion late at night setting off a bright blue light, let's instead change that color of the light to a warmer light instead, more appropriate for the body's natural circadian rhythm instead. And this way, as students are perhaps returning from a late night out, instead of having that bright blue light, they get the warm, inviting light, welcoming them back to their halls instead. And of course, improving their mood, improving their experience whilst they're staying with your institution. Now, there are a great many horror stories that I could tell out of Wi-Fi surveys. A core one, though, heavily revolving around students and the lack of control of humidity and, again, airflow inside their rooms, in particular after having a shower, for instance. Now, a lot of the lights inside bathrooms and showers will, of course, be linked to one of these extractor fans, and that extractor fan will stay on for a couple of minutes after the light has been turned out. But that still can result in a very high humidity environment if that fan isn't left on for a long enough period of time. So how about we combine the temperature and humidity sensors that we can deploy into rooms with a relay inside that fan, enabling that fan to stay on for a longer period of time, enabling that improvement in the experience of that room by the student by extracting out that humidity. And of course, the same can be applied if the student leaves the room. So the door lock sensor has detected that the door has been locked and the room is now vacant. Let's turn on that vent again. Let's get some clean air into that room to ventilate the place. And as a very brief introduction to IoT, what we really see is instead of building out an Internet of Things, we need to build an Internet of Interconnected Things. So here is a very brief proof of concept demonstration. How about we get these sensors into our gyms, into the laundry machines, and perhaps provide an e-paper display into the students' rooms or into the hallways, which can update periodically to give us the status of that gym, give us the status of the laundry, so the student can know is now the right time to go out and use that equipment. Or indeed, perhaps even link into the APIs that are built into CloudPath and provide the student with their own pre-shared key just by an e-paper display that might be inside their room as well. Now, we get IT isn't necessarily the best department to speak to about this, and it's going to be the buildings, it's going to be the maintenance teams who are perhaps the right people to speak to here. But we really do ask, consider the options for using the IoT radios inside your Ruckus wireless access points. As with a very simple service through Ruckus IoT suite, we can enable this true Internet of Interconnected Things. Now, that's all from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Dave Peters to talk about remote access services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Really appreciate that. I'm going to be as brief as possible because I know we're running short of time. So bear with me just one moment, and I will share my screen.
You're just a little bit quiet there, Dave, if you can be closer to your mic.
Is that any better there, James?
A little bit. If you've got another option for it, that'd be even better.
Bear with me one moment.
There we go. That's the one.
Okay, excellent, fantastic. I shall speak up. So share screen. Number 2, share that. There we go. So 12 months, 13 months of lockdown and restrictions and home working and working flexibly, and here we are. So this is just a little bit of a recap on what I've been doing with a lot of our clients in HE and in other areas as well, with helping to enable remote access. Okay, so this is using a technology from a vendor called Pulse Secure, and we've called it Beyond VPN. This is what can we do that is enabling secure remote access beyond the VPN. Okay, so VPN is nothing new. Everyone's got one. I'm sure you've got ones that terminate on your firewall. Maybe you have a VPN concentrator or a dedicated VPN appliance, but they're typically on-demand remote access. Okay, it's historically been very ad hoc, maybe just the IT team, a few privileged users. Some organizations may have a VDI type solution, those kind of things, but most organizations, you know, work was done in the office. Okay, and of course that all suddenly changed 13 months ago. Okay, so we saw a big rush to deploy these VPN solutions to a lot more users, but there are issues here for sustained and wider use, and a lot of that comes down to we couldn't get enough laptops. There's still some supply constraints with getting devices for users as well. Rushing those devices out, are they managed properly? Are they correctly protected, or are they just a dumb endpoint that people can connect to the VPN with to get to internal resources? Okay, and in a lot of cases, we were seeing organizations allowing people to come in from their own home PCs. Okay, and that gives us a brilliant example of, you know, Bob from accounts or whoever it may happen to be has got a bit of a home PC riddled with malware, and we just really can't trust those endpoints. Okay, also adding to that, because if remote access wasn't a big play within a lot of organizations, there may not be the facility or the capability to provide a strong identity or multi-factor authentication. And in almost all cases, those VPNs have been overly permissive. So we're talking full layer 3 tunnel access, simply to access a small number of resources. And boiling this down a little bit, what did we come up with an awful lot of organizations was that they've got a building full of either remote desktop servers and or fat PCs sat on people's desks. And they wanted a quick, easy, secure method of allowing people access to their own desktop via a remote desktop, but without having to worry about unsanctioned endpoints externally. Okay, so what we came up with was as simple as this, and this is stuff that can be deployed in a matter of a few hours. Starting with an asset spreadsheet, we know the users' names and we know their real workstation names. Adding a little bit of PowerShell, not quite as elegant as some of James's, but we say we're going to add in some DNS CNAMEs. So what we've done is workstation1.your domain now can be resolved by the user's logon name. So Bob Smith-PC resolves to his real workstation name. We pop over to our Pulse Secure remote access gateway, and we create 2 resources, 15 minutes of configuration. Okay. Create a link for the user called My Workstation, and we have 2 main methods of access: Windows Terminal Services native to a Windows remote PC, or we can do an HTML5 web-based access, which is entirely browser-based. Anything with a modern browser will work. Okay, and what we get full RDP published to all our users with trivial configuration. The users get 2 links, one for Windows, one for anything else with a modern browser. The Windows link requires a client-side plugin, and the HTML is clientless aside from the browser, okay? And it's presented to the user like that, My Workstation. Click the link and away you go. And I've got a very, very quick demo here of what that looks like from a user perspective. So they've logged into a web portal. They get a link for an HTML5 session and a link for My Workstation for Windows users. Simple, click the link, and within the browser, they log straight in to an HTML5 desktop. You can go full screen with that. It's pretty feature rich. We've got advantages here, and we can control copy and paste. We can control media redirection. There's a whole bunch of things that we can use and finesse to make a more feature rich or a less feature rich, if security is of concern, user environment. Okay, and the Windows side of things, click the link, launches a client-side plugin, and again, logs straight into the remote desktop. Okay, and it really is as simple as that. We can also publish out internal websites, intranet sites that you maybe don't want to publish out to the internet, room booking systems, bubble booking systems is one we've come across recently as well, where people actually do want to start coming back into the office. What with, is in the news this morning that 40 odd of the top 50 organizations in the country are saying we're permanently going to be doing flexible working now, sometimes in, sometimes out, with restricting numbers in the office from a COVID safe perspective. So, room bookings, bubble booking systems is something we've come across very recently as well, is that, you can book your slot in the office so that they're not overpopulated. Okay. Moving on, we spoke about strong identity. So if you haven't already got a multi-factor authentication solution to use with VPN login, or you're using a system that doesn't support that, we this on box, straight out of the box of Pulse Secure, is we've got TOTP, time-based one-time passwords. It's the standard QR code stuff you'll have seen 1,000 times before. Pick an authenticator app, Microsoft, Google, Authy, whatever you feel the need to use. You log in for the first time, onboards you for multi-factor authentication. As simple as that. Okay. But that's pretty basic, okay? You can see it's pretty easy to set up. We've got some remote desktop access, but what about longer term, okay? So, we're in a position now, maybe you've got more sanctioned laptops. People are not using those fat desktops anymore, and they want to be a bit more mobile and be able to work from home, work from whatever location they want to be able to do. What do we do with those guys? An on-demand VPN is not good enough anymore. Don't take my word for it. Gartner, Forrester, all the rest of it. There's loads and loads of reference architectures out there for software-defined perimeters, zero trust network access, those kind of things. If this is something, this is a very, very high-level overview you're about to see. If it's something that you're interested in, do reach out to us. We're running some workshops around this, so let us know if you'd like to dive into this in more detail. But say we've got domain join sanctioned laptops, okay, but they're out there in the wild, okay. What we want to try and achieve is an always-on VPN, a software-defined perimeter. Now, this is a hop, skip, and a jump away from ZTNA, from CASB, from SASE solutions, all of these industry acronyms. But essentially, our stage one is an always-on VPN, okay? And what that means is devices may physically leave your network, but they never logically leave. They are permanently tunneled back to your perimeter and your resources, wherever they may be, whether they're cloud, whether they're infrastructure as a service, software as a service, on-prem data centers, on-prem offices. We tunnel those users to the most appropriate locations, okay? We'll go back to our nightmare user, Bob. He's a bit of a problem. He's got some dubious browsing habits and got a corporate laptop. We give him that corporate laptop, it's domain join, he leaves the office, and we've got little or no control over what he's doing at that point. He's out in the cold. We don't want to leave him outside. So top right-hand corner is Bob just floating around on the internet with his laptop, joining whatever Wi-Fi he wants. But our SDP brings him back to the office, back to our network, our secure environment, where we've got content filtering, where we've got management over that device, where we've got software updates, we've got the ability to look after Bob and what he's up to, okay? And then we've got secure access to those resources. How do we achieve that? Typically, this is authenticated either with PKI certificate authentication, sometimes using SAML, modern authentication, and sometimes even passwordless using YubiKey tokens. Okay, as soon as that VPN agent that's on that managed endpoint sees an internet connection, the tunnel starts. And this is not user specific, this is device and user specific. So there is a device level or a machine level context for Windows endpoints that have that concept, that the VPN will be up and running pre-user logon. Okay, we use a variety of location awareness rules to achieve this, typically DNS based, but they can be based on other metrics as well. And if the device is out in the cold, Windows Computer Context VPN starts, full tunnel back to HQ, wherever or whatever HQ might be. Group policy, scripts, software distribution all work at this point. They are not off domain. The user logs on, they get an interactive log onto the domain, not using cache credentials on their Windows endpoint. So this is key because it overcomes the lost password, forgotten password, locked account, and new users as well. You can distribute a new laptop to a user remotely, never having logged onto it before. They can log on for a first time and get an interactive log on and onboard. Okay, so overcomes change password issues for remote users. And as soon as the user logs on, the VPN transitions to a user context. This is transparent to the user, don't know it's happened, takes a second, okay? And then we can integrate that into your next generation firewall for user ID, as James was showing earlier. And we typically terminate it in a remote access zone. So you've got full visibility of traffic coming from your remote users back into your private network, wherever that may be. Like I say, it might be infrastructure as a service in Azure, in AWS, it can be on-prem, it can be a variety of things or a combination. Okay, so, you know, software-defined perimeter, it's not new, it's been around for quite a while now. It is evolving, and it is ultimately designed to be a replacement for that on-demand VPN, which is no longer good enough, vulnerable to identity theft and impersonation, and typically over-permissive for what the users that are on those VPNs actually need. Okay, and that's all from me. I was as brief as I could be. So thank you very much for your time. If you do have any further questions, please do feel to reach out.
Thank you very much there, Dave. If you just give me 1 second. So I'm just going to wrap things up, and in order to do that, I'm going to just circle back to where we started this session earlier today. So clearly, you know, the business of education has changed dramatically over a really short space of time, and we need to go and make sure that we are keeping pace with those changing behaviours and the changing demands of our customers, but also making sure that we've got a clear eye on how we're going to secure our financial future. So there's essentially 3 things that we've got to do. So the first one is we've got to focus on that home from home experience, you know, from the accommodation, travelling across the campus and all the way into the classroom. And the second thing is we've got to be prepared for anything. You know, we've got to ensure that we can ride out any future quarantine restrictions by providing this ability to both learn and teach from anywhere in the world. And we've got to go and make sure that that experience of learning is absolutely first class. It's got to be ready for that Netflix generation. But also, you know, we've got to make sure that we secure these experiences. And what we mean by that is tying together these disparate security systems in order to go and make sure we're improving continually the organisational security posture. You know, we've got to make sure that we maintain our reputational integrity. We've got valuable intellectual property. We've got to go and make sure that we keep a close arm round. We've got personal information, financial information. We basically don't want to be a BBC News headline. So, you know, like any single business that's out there, all educational institutes, whether you're a further education, higher education, it doesn't really matter. We all need to be planning for the future. And we've all got to go and have a mission, and this mission has got to be based around delivering this integrated smart campus experience. But, you know, this is quite complex stuff. It's not going to be achieved overnight. So, you know, like anything, you need a plan. And I think this is where we at ANSecurity can help. And we've thought a lot about this. So if you're looking to move to some sort of smarter world, whatever that might look like, this is going to be a multi-year initiative for you. And like anything that has got a further visibility longer than about 3 months, you need to go and make sure you've got a vision of where you want to get to. So we can go and help you articulate that vision. We can also then go and work out how you can build a plan to achieving it, because if you have a vision and you have a plan of how you're going to get there, then your chances of succeeding increase significantly. So what we've done is we've pulled together some big brains here over at ANSecurity, and we've put together, we're calling it the Roadmap for Future Success. I personally like the idea that it's the Smart Secure Campus Planning Workshop, and this is something that we do absolutely free of charge for organisations within higher education and further education. And basically, if you can go and give us 2 hours of your time, we'll go and deliver a workshop for you, which is really, really well considered. And we can do this remotely, or if the conditions allowed, I mean, it'd be great if we could come and do this face to face with you guys, because in the session, what we'll basically do is we will go and work out with you what the art of the possible is. Start to go and set that vision of where you're trying to get to, what your objectives are, assign priorities to each of these objectives, and then start to, move some post-it notes around the room so then you can go and start to see what you can deliver. But clearly, you need to know what that's going to cost. So we'll go and give you a realistic view of what you can achieve for varying different price points, because there's no point trying to plan for a vision that you've got no way of absolutely funding. So, if you've got deep pockets, there's a lot more that you can do, but actually, in the world that we've got now, there is so much that you can deliver for relatively small investment. And these objectives are going to span multiple academic cycles, so we need to go and make sure that we're covering absolutely all permutations. So we've basically broken things down into a number of chunks. The first one is just focusing on this living experience, and clearly that's one of those things that's so important to that overall student satisfaction level. So we've got to go and make sure that we're providing that great end-to-end experience. And then when it comes to learning, we've got to go and make sure that we've got that resilience for any enforced quarantine that we might have from the future. We've got to have the ability to remote learn, remote educate, and we've got to go and have a teaching experience which is absolutely fit for that Netflix generation. We need that non-stop access to on-demand, high-quality learning and collaboration tools. And James mentioned earlier, IOIT, you heard it here first. This is a new phrase, but it's absolutely on point here, because there's no point in investing in IoT and cool, sexy technology if you've got no plans on how you're going to effectively glue it all together. And when you're gluing it all together, you really need to go and make sure that you're doing that securely. So we need to go and make sure that we're absolutely baking in core security principles and practices into our infrastructure so that we make sure that we maintain that reputational integrity. Now, something that we've not covered so far, but when we've been talking to customers within education, probably more at the university level, a lot of it comes down to this phrase, which personally I absolutely can't stand, but there's no better way of saying it. It's monetization. These are the additional, almost non-educational revenue streams. And there's a lot that we can do to go and help plug in the gaps that we might have in our finances by looking at the ways in which we can use technology to go and either improve the revenue streams that we have at the moment, or when there are new technologies that come out that we're considering investing in, how can we go and start to look at that slightly differently in order to go and build profitable revenue streams for the future. Now, there's lots of really interesting articles that come out from lots of vendors, and some that I saw last week from Ruckels, which are really, really exciting about ways in which you can monetize the technology that you've invested in. We'd like to bring that to you, because a lot of these things, you can actually go and make a desk-based assessment as to whether there is a business case for actually doing something like this. And then finally, we will break things down into the future vision setting. And this is some real blue sky thinking. We need to go and make sure that we are thinking about what our campus and what our learning experience will be, not just now, but when the class of 2025 graduate into the future. So this is a free debate that we will basically document. We'll then go and send that to you. and then we'll go and review it every single quarter with you, because this is something that is going to evolve naturally. New technology will come out, there'll be different economic pressures, there may be some things that are outside of all of our control that we need to take into consideration. But if we've got that fundamental framework and knowing where we're trying to get to, then our chances of actually succeeding are going to increase significantly. So, if this is something that you're interested in, like I say, it's absolutely free of charge. The reason why we're not charging for this is because we find that when we deliver these workshops, we get so much value out of learning your experiences. So we're very, very keen to do these. If this is something that you're interested in, then please reach out to myself or to your account manager, and they will go and book something in with you. Ideally, we'd love to do it face-to-face. But if we need to do it remotely, then that's an effective solution as well. There are a couple of things that I also wanted to bring up as well. So Dave mentioned about ZTNA. This is something which is incredibly popular at the moment. And again, we're running a very nice, effective Zero Trust Network Architecture workshop, which helps you kind of get through almost like the vendor nonsense to be able to work out what ZTNA means to you and the things that you might want to be doing in order to move towards a Zero Trust network environment. One thing that we also forgot to mention as well, Eddie at Ruckus has very kindly, through his colleagues, managed to get approval for a 14-day free trial of Ruckus Analytics. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at, Ruckus don't do this for almost anybody else really. We're quite lucky to be able to do this, but for a single zone within your environment, we can go and set up a quick 14-day trial. So again, if that's something that you're interested in, my email address is rpage@ansecurity.com, and we can go and get that booked in for you. So it says here, time for questions, but I'm well aware that we have no time left. So if you do have any questions, then please drop myself or your account manager a line. We will make sure that that gets to the right person so that it gets answered for you. So it just leaves me to say thank you very, very much for your time and attention this morning. We really do appreciate it, and we hope to see you face to face over the next 12 months. We hope restrictions allow, but what we definitely hope is when we run this session in April, May in 2022, that we do it in person. So thank you very much, keep safe, and we look forward to